Okay, so here we are again, and I do appreciate very much you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here with me and to hear this testimony. After, by the way, this is a little behind the scenes as I usually do. After listening to some of these videos that have been recorded and recovering some that were on the cutting room floor, shall we say, um, I've come to realize that, not boasting on myself, you understand, but there's some magnificent things that God has done in my life. And I would say that I'm not the only one by any means. And I give God the glory. And I'm hoping that some of these things that we're talking about, that you may hear otherwise, um, truly are a blessing to you. Just putting that out there. Now, I'd like to uh, make notice of something also, that if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, there's some things that I've already said that I will touch on in a manner of speaking as we continue and hopefully finish this part 3 up. So if you haven't seen part 1 and part 2, I might recommend that you, when you get the opportunity, yeah, go ahead and watch them. And then if you had any questions about this one, then it may be um, the answer may be in parts 1 and 2. Now, some people may be wondering if I have a tendency to repeat myself. Well, in these testimonies, the answer to that question is yes and no. And yes, because all of these pieces of my testimony, they're intertwined, if you will, one with another. It's like fabric, if you will. And one testimony may lead into yet an additional testimony story, if you will, exit one and enter into another, and or vice versa. So there, yeah, you may hear some things that I've said before, but it is what it is. Now, I guess that's about it. If I can think of anything else as I go or as we go here, I'll be sure and let you know. Oh, there is one thing right off the top here before I forget. It, as I've said before, and throughout this testimony, any time that I have ever been blessed to see heaven, every time I've been awake, and that's to say, I was not asleep. I was not dreaming. I was not imagining any of this. I was fully cognate and fully aware of where I was. Now, having said that, yes, many times and occasions that this has happened, I was asleep, and then I'm not asleep, and I know I'm not asleep, and no, I'm not dreaming a dream within a dream garbage. No, I was, as I've said, I was fully cognate, fully awake, and aware, which I suppose is a good point and a good place to start this one. Actually, these last two. With that said, one morning between 2 and 5 a.m., after having been asleep for, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, my eyes open. Now, generally speaking, if and when I ever suspect, if you will, that I'm walking in the spirit or God is doing something that's not in the natural realm or even in the natural realm, I will take a look around to determine exactly where I am. Just saying. And in this case, it was no exception. So I opened my eyes, I paused for a moment, and I looked down, and I knew immediately where I was. And that, of course, was heaven. Now, and then, of course, I look outward, and I see a lot of grass, and, of course, at my feet, a lot of grass, and trees, etc. But I'm overlooking this park area. It had several picnic tables, and one in particular had people sitting in it. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about the picnic tables briefly. One of the things that kind of struck me funny was that These picnic tables, just like any other picnic table in any park, you might say, these particular picnic tables had four corner posts on them supporting a roof. Now, they did not need a roof, but it had a roof over it. And I thought, well, that's neat. I mean, it didn't really need one, but that's something. Now, along with that, I recognized three people. But again, before I tell you who that is and who they were, I noticed that what these three people were doing, they all had what appeared to be a black leather bound, if you will, book. And now, I did not say Holy Scriptures. It didn't say King James or anything else. In fact, it had no title on the cover or the back of the book. And yet they were all sitting down. They were studying. They were discussing what this book that they had. These three people had. And to me, it had to be the Word of God. There's no other way around it. Adding to that, they were drinking coffee. And I thought, wow, that's neat. Now the three people. To my furthest right would have been and was my dad, who at that time had passed away maybe 3 years before this event. Seated next to him, to my left and his right, was my mother-in-law, who preceded him in death by about 4 years. Now, in both of their cases, if you will, the Lord let me know with no mistake, no guessing, both of them, and this is to say individually, that each one of those had made it. They're there. That's a part of another testimony about my dad. But the Lord let me know back then, yeah, he made it. And I had, I don't know if I've put this out on testimony, on video yet, but I had verification about my mother-in-law who preceded my dad in death several years, that she made it as well. I won't I won't mention any more about that, except to say I had no doubt that that lady made heaven. Okay. Now, immediately to her right, which would have been my left and then this far left, the third person that was sitting there was my father-in-law, who at that time had just passed away maybe 2 weeks beforehand. Now, a part of the reason I was very, very happily surprised to see him there was because that would be my first verification that he too has made it. Now, at that moment, I was about 35 feet away from them. I could see them very clearly. Wasn't any problem. But I knew, I don't know how I knew, but I knew in my spirit I wasn't really supposed to approach them. And they saw me, they smiled, and I smiled back, and we all waved at each other. And so there you are. Now, I didn't mention, or I haven't mentioned as yet, why I've got to go to heaven. And by the way, this is just starting, this portion. A part of the reason that I was rewarded, the opportunity to go to heaven, I believe, was because my wife and I passed a test, if you will, a period of time, a grooming period by the Lord. And it was one of his many, many blessings out of that. And I'm sorry to have gone there, but that's how and why we were there. How and why I got to see heaven that day. Now, so back to the story. After we smiled and waved at each other, I turned around. I did a 180 degree, and then now, if you will, I'm parallel with these steps. They weren't very high. It was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 steps that led up to this larger porch area. These steps appeared to be as wide as the building I'm about to describe, about 50, 60 feet across. And it had a doorway opening on its first floor, if you will. It had no doors in it. I suppose there's no need for doors there, at least not in that building. And so I walked towards the center of the building to enter it, and there's a card rack there. Now, we'll talk about that card rack here in a moment, but first things first. So I go into inside this building, and I saw this well and a fountain. Um, to me, it's. I'm not suggesting that it is. It just reminds me of that well, if you will, that um, in the Gospels it talks about the sick. They would sit by that well, and whenever the angel would stir the water, whoever was in the water first would be the one to receive the healing. And I'm not suggesting or saying that that's that well. That's exactly what that well is, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not. I don't mean to. I don't mean to imply that. But to me, it sure seemed like it. And uh, there you are. It's beautiful. Now, so after look at that for a while, I turned back around, and now I'm going to be looking out that building, back out onto the porch area, and I see a fourth person that I knew and know. And I'm thinking, well, I've got to go talk to them. I've got to go talk to them. So I made my way out of the building, and this fourth person was my first wife, and I add was my ex. Now the card rack. She was tending that card rack now, and that to me would have suited her perfect for for her character. That even on Earth, she would, if there had been a card rack, she would be the one that's tending it. Just saying. Now, again, I don't know what was on that card, on those cards. I doubt seriously it was a get well card, but I don't know. I just did not. I didn't feel it pertinent to, well, just take one and look at it. I don't know why I didn't do it, but I didn't. I didn't. I was more focused on wanting to speak with her for a moment. I wanted to, if you will, clear the air. There's some unfinished business, if you will. And I thought, well, this perfect opportunity. But she didn't, and that's fine. She walks off, and I'm thinking, no, 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 no. I'm going to be Mr. Persistent. And I started heading towards her, and the next thing I know, I didn't just run into that rack. That rack was like 1/3 of the way in my body. I went, whoa. And then I knew as an absolute fact, yes, I am in the spirit at this time. And this rack was penetrating my being. I went, whoa, whoa. I said, so that's what that would feel like. And I back up, and of course, I'm not harmed. I'm thinking, whoa, okay. So kind of surprised by that. And then I got my attention back. Oh, well, there she is over there. Now, so I go around that rack, and she was heading in towards this building, making her way over to the left side of the, pardon me, to the left side of this I don't know what you call it, this first floor. Foyer, I suppose. Well, it has a spiral staircase that when you start walking up, it goes to the left. Now, from the camera, I'm going to have to, it goes to the left, Um, and so she starts walking up this stairwell, and it's a concave wall, spiral staircase. She gets, I don't know, 10, 12 feet up off the floor, maybe as high as 20 feet. And on the wall, there's another concave. It's about, or shall I say, it's much more pronounced, if you please, than the concave of the wall. And she steps into that, and then it turns, and then all of a sudden it just looks like it's the wall, concave wall. And then a moment later, then it comes back, and it's deeply recessed again. I'm thinking, that's a door. So, hey, she can go through it, I can go through it. So I went up the stairs, and I stepped into that doorway, if you will. Now I need to interject this here. I have never, at that time, had ever seen anything like that on this earth. I had never seen anything like it. It would be approximately 5, 6 years, maybe 7 years down the road in time. And I saw one down at Fort Hood, Texas, and at the Darnell Army Hospital when I was working as a liaison for J&J Maintenance Corporation. Nonetheless, I saw that and I said, "Whoa, okay, what is this?" And so, sure enough, I went to it and I walked through that door and it spun around just as I'd seen in heaven. But the other side of that, and that is to say, in the other room, it was a photo lab, and that was a photo door. Now I know some of you. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's nothing. I've seen those. I've seen those before. I had never seen one on this earth, and this, as I say, was several years beforehand. I saw one in heaven. Just saying. Now, so I step in it to that doorway in heaven, and then I realize now I know what this is, and what it is, what it was an elevator. I thought, well, this is really cool. Big surprise to me. And the next thing you know, it's going down. And I mean, it is accelerating. It's just tremendous rate. And I was thinking, man, I'm enjoying this. It's like, wow, this is, it's not like the bottom fell out, but this thing, in fact, it was accelerating, going faster and faster. And I thought for a moment, wow, this is really neat. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, this thing is going down? Well, wait a minute, Lord. Now, just a minute. Now, how far and where is it going to stop at, if you catch my drift? And I almost, borderline started getting excited. Now, wait a minute, Lord, wait. And all of a sudden, it stopped. And then I hit my bed, as in, like, I flew. I would have flown, shall we say, 3 or 4 feet up from the air down into my bed, doing a belly flop. Now, my wife and I, we were one of the. I'm not suggesting we were the last holdouts for a waterbed, but we really enjoyed ours for the time that we had it. And I hit that bed so hard, I don't know, bouncing, a couple of bounces, a foot and a half easily. And here's my wife on the other side of me, and she didn't flinch. I thought, surely if anything's gonna wake that girl up, this is gonna wake her up. But she never did. Now she's exceptionally, extraordinarily light sleeper, I might add. But she didn't. And I put my hand on her, thinking, well, are you okay? She didn't move. And instantly, I cried out to the Lord and I asked him, I said, oh, please, God, please, 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 let me go back. Please let me go back. And my eyes closed. I did not fall asleep. There was a pause, I don't know, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and my eyes opened again. And this time, what I saw, though, I began to recognize it for what it was. It took me a moment, but I saw a lot of things going from left to right. It was almost as though you were standing outside of a tornado or a hurricane and seeing wind and dust, move. But it wasn't wind and dust. It was time, if you will. And then all of a sudden it cleared up. And I knew at that moment where I was, and I also knew, well, among other things, I wasn't where I had been before in heaven. I was in heaven. I see the grass. I'm in heaven. But it wasn't at the same time or the same place. To say, this would be the one of the few times that I've ever asked the Lord to allow me to see heaven. and He granted me that opportunity. But in this occasion, I saw heaven in the future. And as such, from about roughly 12, 15 feet away, I saw a relative of mine who is still here on Earth. Now, on Earth at this time, we had a disagreement. I'll leave it at that. Um, but this time, I approached this person, and we calmly discussed things, talked things out, and they said, and I quote, and that is to say, among other things, that they just had to let some things go. And I said, I'm so glad. I'm so glad of that. Also, I'm very glad that they made it, as I'm very glad that I'll have made it. And that was that. And that is, we both praised God and thanked Him. And that'd be the end of that, in a manner of speaking. And that was always I was supposed to see. I was given that opportunity and gift, if you please, by the Lord to see this in the future, that this relationship is going to be healed. And so that's that. And I recall closing my eyes, and a moment or so later, I opened my eyes, fully cognate. Here I am back in my bed, and then I reach over and I just touch my wife, as I have for these many years. Barely touch her, and she wakes. And I said, honey, you're not going to believe what just happened. And she said, what? And then I shared with her what I've just shared with you. Notwithstanding that experience, yes, that relationship was healed, is healed, and but that was the first time I've ever asked to go to heaven. Of the several times and occasions that the Lord has blessed me with that, that's the first time. And so I'm also reminded of something else too. In the scriptures, it talks about that God's no respecter of man. And to say none of us are incapable of doing or having a blessing, if you will, this another isn't. God doesn't play favorites like that. To say, yes, each of us, we have our own specific gifts and callings, no doubt about that. And yes, they are different. And for that reason, we too are different. We all have our own personalities to add to that mix. But I had a gentleman ask me one time, as I shared with him, I've seen heaven at least. I've either seen heaven and or heaven has visited me at least 7 times. And he asked me, oh, you died and they brought you back. I said, no, I didn't have to die to visit. You see, it's going to be our temporary home. It's not going to be our permanent home, contrary to what some believe. It's not. Not from a scriptural standpoint, it's not. It's a temporary home, and it's, as Jesus said in the scriptures, I have gone to prepare a place for you. For in my Father's house there are many mansions. Now, if you understand the dynamics of the traditional Jewish wedding, especially back in that day when Jesus was with us on his initial visit, if you will, ministry on the earth. At that particular time, and I don't know how many hundreds and thousands of years that led up to this tradition, and it was a tradition as a tradition could be. I don't know about that, but if you ever study up on that, you will find out that everything in Scripture referring to the rapture or us going home is parallel to that scenario. And so for that reason, whenever a bridegroom would go after his bride, after it's kind of a sneaky kind of thing. Oh, he goes at the middle of the night and gets his bride. But before all that happens, there's an agreement between the fathers, if you will. And I'm going too far. I don't mean to, but so I'll try to narrow this down. Whenever the two families come into an agreement about a marriage, what would happen is they would drink a ceremonial cup or drink of wine. And the father and his son, the bridegroom, would make an arrangement, if you please, with the bride or the future bride and her father and family. If everybody met eye to eye on it, what the bridegroom and his father would do is go back to the bridegroom's father's house. They would prepare a place for the bridegroom. And then not until the father of the house said, okay, son, now it's ready. Now go get your bride. Not until he said it was right. Not until he said it was finished. Because it was a bridal chamber, complete, stocked with everything you could ever need, be it a week, pardon me, 7 days, 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 months, 7 years. After that was established, the father would say, okay, son, go get your bride. Well, the bride would get all of his, what we would otherwise recognize as best men together, and they'd go sneak off at night, and they would not so much kidnap her, but in a matter of speaking, that's what they were doing. But I mean, it was all on the up and up. Then the bridegroom would go get his bride and then bring her back. And they would stay in that bridal suite, if you please, for that period of time. That's what heaven is and represents for us, likewise. So it is a temporary. Now, after that bridal week, then they come out of that bridal suite. Then there's the marriage supper. Marriage supper of the Lamb, ring a bell? And then afterwards, then they go to wherever it is that they're going to reside. In this case, as far as Scripture is concerned, that's when we would come back with him and set up his kingdom on this earth to rule and reign for 1,000 years, and we will rule and reign with him. I know I've gone a little bit far with that, but being able to visit heaven, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking. After all, we're going to be there for a little while at least. Some of us will be there and have our past relatives, if you will, the ones that have already passed on, they've just got there a little bit earlier than we did as such. And asking the Lord to have that honor, if it'd be okay to visit, just to visit, I don't think there's a problem with that. I don't believe the Lord would have a problem with it. Now, whether it is in his will or whether it is in his purpose, that's between you and him. But you don't have to die to go to heaven. Now, if you're going to stay, that might be a different scenario altogether, but not to visit. Okay? So, I'm hoping that in all these, like I say, this little mini-series here, that you receive a blessing out of it. I hope that they're a blessing for you. And I look forward to meeting you again, if not in person, either here on this earth or in heaven. And I'll have more videos coming out as soon as possible, okay? In the meantime, thank you again for being here, and I'll see you next time.